Welcome back to another episode of the Bulletproof Fantasy Football Podcast. With me today is Ryan McDowell, the godfather of Dynasty, all things Dynasty. You can find him on Twitter at RyanMC23. He is the co-owner of my favorite website, Dynasty Football. It is instrumental in my process across the board. He is the host of the Locked On Dynasty podcast, the DLF podcast host or a guest on basically every podcast in the world. Anyway, am I missing anything, Ryan? Did I get it all?
I think you got most of it there. Yeah, you got most of it. How's it going, Drew? Good to be on with you today.
Things are going good, man. The first week of the season was exciting. I want to just quickly dive into some current events in week one. The 49ers had perhaps the most bizarre start to any fantasy season we've ever seen. What do you make of like the Trey Sermon healthy scratch? He was going in the first round of one QB dynasty league or dynasty rookie drafts, and then he got healthy scratch in week one. Have you ever seen that before?
Not that I recall. Not a player that that I guess we could say that was that high profile. That he was in my starting lineup in the Scott Fish Bowl. So maybe that says more about my team than it does about Trey Sermon. But yeah, this was a guy that we were expecting at least even early in the year to play a role, right? To be in that timeshare, and that's what the preseason told us as well. That's everything that we heard from beat reporters, everything that we saw in preseason ourselves, and we had a longer gap between preseason and the regular season than I think than we've ever had before, certainly in quite some time. You just wonder what happened in that week and a half that changed things, that pushed him down the depth chart. So I don't know. I did had some conversations, and it sounds like there was a little bit of looking at the matchup with the Lions and thinking, we're good here. Let's make sure the rookie knows he has to, earn his stripes. He has to keep working hard, all that kind of stuff. So basically a motivational ploy. I mean, I get that, and that could certainly be the issue, but that's not a good sign either, right? Like even if that's all it is, that's also a bad thing. Man, it's just crazy that the 49ers, I feel like we're at the center of the two biggest dynasty stories of week one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel like I had sent a message to the patrons back in, I don't remember when it was, in the offseason at some point when everybody was all excited about Trey Sermon. I was like, no, like he's not my guy. Like, just don't do it. And right. I had made what I thought was a compelling argument that you should not be drafting Trey Sermon. And then I had said, there's a chance this guy doesn't even get on the field. And I didn't mean it like he's not going to get on the field. I was just like, there's a lot of guys in his bucket that don't get on the field. Right. And then he didn't even play. I was like, holy,
you didn't know how right you were going to be on that one.
Yeah, but then the 49ers just ruined my day as well, because then I was in like the same breath. I'm like, you need Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk's the truth. You got to get Brandon Ayuk, and now I look like a fool. What's the story of him? Is he coming back? Should we be punting him? What are we doing?
It doesn't sound good. Certainly, the Shanahan's comments that Shanahan seemed frustrated with him, which is never a good sign, right? I guess the good thing is, maybe the coaching staff thinks they have the depth to play this game, but they really don't. We know what Mohamed Sanu is. Maybe Trent Sherfield is this breakout, but I don't really think so. I think he's an ancillary. He's a depth guy. He is what he is. So I don't feel like they can play this game for long with Brandon Ayuk. But to hear Shanahan say things like he's got to show he's better than the guy behind him, it does give me Dante Pettis vibes, and I've seen some other people say that as well. But I fell for Dante Pettis, what was it, 3 or 4 years ago now, and we were drafting him. We the collective dynasty community, right? We were drafting him higher than he deserved in offseason startups, and then the preseason comes, and we're hearing these stories about he's far down the depth chart, or he's a backup right now, and even then, I remember thinking, nah, just basically ignoring that, thinking somehow what I thought or what I knew was more important or more correct. And obviously that was far from the case. And we never really heard from Dante Pettis again. Now, I don't think it's the same situation. We're talking about a first round wide receiver who did He impressed in his rookie season. And you can talk about the situation with his competition being out of the lineup. I do think that's a big factor. But if we were talking just straight buy or sell, I would have been closer to your corner this offseason. So I'm a little worried as well.
Yeah, it's funny because the Dante Pettis thing, it was a buildup though. Like it wasn't out of left field. Like they, the first game or the first preseason game, he didn't really. I can't remember the first preseason game. He didn't play that much or he didn't do that much. But then he progressively, I think the third preseason game, he even played into the second half, and people were like, "No, it's fine." And I was like starters don't play the second half, guys.
Yeah, I was one of the ones saying it was fine, and it was clearly not fine. But I mean, we have gotten a little bit of that build up here too, though, because I can't remember if it was the second or third preseason game. We saw Ayuk rotate in and out with Sherfield. He did not. He was not the clear starter, or he was not lining up with Debo every time or whatever. So that was a little bit of a hint. And then he had, I think the hamstring issue came after that. So. We kind of ignored that.
Yeah, I must have just been, rose-colored glasses because I was all in on Ayuk, and I just missed all that because I thought it came out of left field. It was like, I saw Sherfield catch the first touchdown pass. I was like, well, that's Brandon Ayuk's spot. What are you doing? And
I don't think it was. You're totally right that the Pettis thing was more telegraphed. I mean, we heard a lot of coach speak about that. It kind of frustrated me on Sunday afternoon because it was it felt like it was like 1:30 in the afternoon, after kickoff, and then here come the beat reporters dropping these tweets about Sermon and about Ayuk, and I'm thinking, that would have been helpful a couple hours ago to know these things. So I don't know if, they had to have known. I don't know. I don't get it.
Yeah, it really felt like it was like they were like they didn't even know, and they're like making up a story that backed it up or something. But yeah, I don't know. Like maybe I was just rose-colored glasses, missed it all, and it was all right there to see, and just chose to ignore it. But
we do that sometimes.
On the plus side, out of this 49ers team, we did get Elijah Mitchell breakout game. Is he here to stay? What are you thinking?
I think he's here to stay. I don't think. I've seen a lot of assumptions that he's the RB1 in this offense moving forward, and he certainly might be. But what we knew about the 49ers backfield, even when Mostert was healthy, even when Jeff Wilson was healthy a month ago or 6 weeks ago, we knew we were going to see all of these guys, right? And we know Shanahan likes to rotate backs. We know a couple of those guys have a pretty ugly injury history. So it's almost a week by week thing. And now Mostert's gone, Wilson's gone. And to assume that we know now is kind of silly to me. I mentioned it on Twitter earlier this week. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Trey Sermon leads this team in rushing this coming Sunday. That would not be a surprise. If he's the leading rusher on this team by the end of the season, that wouldn't be a surprise to me either. I'm with you. I don't think he's necessarily a special talent. If he pops over the next couple months, he would be a sell candidate for me. I think I would maybe say the same thing about Mitchell, just because of that backfield. I also saw somebody say it's a backfield to avoid. I think that's crazy because no matter who it is, they produce. So I want the pieces. I just want to sell high when I get the chance.
Absolutely. I think it's my approach with this kind of thing is always, yes, it's a backfield to avoid when you're buying the most expensive guy.
Right.
But as soon as I can get the cheapest guy, I want that guy. Like give me the next guy who rotates onto the taxi squad every time with San Francisco. I don't care who it is. And that was my approach this year with Trey Sermon and Elijah Mitchell. I was like, well, I don't want Trey Sermon at first round pick prices, but pretty interested in Elijah Mitchell in the fourth round. Mm-hmm. Like I'm into that. And now that Elijah Mitchell popped up, I'm like, well, see what you can get. I'm not, if he plays again and he gets the carries, he's going to produce. We know that.
Right.
You said, Trey Sermon could be the guy this week, and it could be Elijah Mitchell 2 weeks from now, and it could be JaMychal Hasty at some point, and some guy we've never heard of yet is probably going to pop up on the taxi squad at some point, and he's going to eventually work his way into the lineup and have a big week here or there. So.
I think it was San Francisco that added Cannon, right? Did
they?
Baltimore dumped Trenton Cannon, and I'm pretty sure San Francisco grabbed him.
Sounds like the guy we need to be adding.
There you go. He's cheap for sure. He's the cheapest.
Perfect. Okay, so this is a process-based podcast where we want to learn how to play. Teach us how to fish is essentially the goal here. So you have coined, I think I'm correct in saying that you have coined the term productive struggle.
Yes, sort of. I've adapted the term to the fantasy football world. I'll say that. So that's actually an educational term. I'm a teacher, and that's where the term originates. I wish I knew who actually coined it. I should know that by now. But I pretty much stole the term and applied it to how I play Dynasty because it represented that strategy, that team building focus and way to attack a Dynasty startup so well that when I heard it or at least paid attention to it, I'm sure I'd heard it many times before, but yeah, it was just perfect.
That's nice. So like, how long have you been doing the productive struggle for? Like, when did this kind of strategy originate?
I was using that strategy before I called it that strategy. 2010, 2012, basically quite a while. Every team I was drafting, I was pretty much drafting the same way at that point. And we can get into that, but then it's the end of the school year in 2014, I believe, 2014. And I'm sitting in a meeting. Nobody wants to be there. You're ready for summer break. And the speaker uses this term, productive struggle. And immediately I grab my notebook and start writing notes. I'm sure they were very impressed. But if they had seen that that the notes were all about Dynasty fantasy football, maybe not so much. But yeah, I knew that's what I did. I certainly, my plan was certainly to struggle in the early going, but it was a productive struggle. It was a struggle with a goal and an endpoint in mind. And it's funny because I've seen that term mentioned and used and applied a lot to bad Dynasty teams. And, just like not every student who is struggling in a classroom is a productive struggle, not every bad Dynasty team is a productive struggle either. Some of them are just bad Dynasty teams. Some of them are just struggling students who, if you leave them on their own, they're not going to be productive, at least in that moment. So they need a little more support, a little more push, and some of these Dynasty teams do as well.
Gotcha. So tell us about the strategy. How does it work?
So again, I was doing this 10 years ago, basically before the term and before I applied the term. Basically, I was just drafting super young players. That's the very most generic way to say it. And now in Dynasty, that doesn't sound like a very unique strategy. I mean, that's what everybody's doing basically. And but thinking back to that time, I don't know how long you've been playing Dynasty, Drew, but that was pretty unique. Dynasty was certainly still growing at that point. Lots of converts from redraft, and you would see a 28, 29-year-old LaDainian Tomlinson be the 101 in Dynasty startups. And same thing for all of those running backs that were, at the top of their game at that point. Now that's going back even further. We're talking like 2006, 07 for that. But yeah, so when I wrote the article, the Productive Struggle article in the summer of 2014, it was based around drafting youth heavily, avoiding the running back almost altogether. At about that same time, Sean Siegel had written the zero running back strategy or article. I think that was first on RotoViz, I believe, but of course that has obviously, become a mainstay in the fantasy space. So a lot of my ideas were kind of involved, kind of included that as well, because at that point, the running back landscape was ugly. It was horrible. And if you were drafting running backs early in a startup draft, the best case is you were getting 1 or 2 years out of those guys. That was the best case. So it seemed obvious to me to build around wide receivers, build around youth, build around those assets that were going to gain value, which also included rookie draft picks. So trading down in the startup draft, acquiring future draft picks. Those were all small pieces of the strategy. And again, now those have become commonplace. Everybody wants to do that. Everybody wants to trade down. Everybody wants future picks. So in some ways it's become hard to replicate that strategy, 6 or 7 years later.
It's funny. Even 2 years ago, I felt like I had no problems trading down on a startup draft. This past year, I feel like it was near impossible. Like you had to like be out pounding the pavement trying to find somebody to trade up, and it was even 2 years ago, I felt like you'd in a startup draft throw out a message, hey, anybody want to trade up here, and there'd be 2 or 3 takers. Now it's like, hey, anybody want to trade up here? Crickets. You have to go around. Hey, are you sure you don't want to trade up here? Like, there's probably somebody you like, and it's a struggle to now get the future draft picks in startup drafts. But I love it.
It really is, and I guess I left out kind of the namesake of the strategy, productive struggle. When you're doing all those things, and again, I'm going back 7 or 8 or 10 years. When you're doing all those things, and you're focused on, you're not worried about running back at all. You're basically punting that position, focused on wide receiver, focused on young players. You're probably going to lose in year one, and probably lose a lot and often. So really part of the strategy is, yes, I'm going to lose in year one. I'm basically punting away year one. But one thing that comes from that is I'm going to get a high draft pick. So now I'm adding a top 20, typically by our ADP data, you're adding a top 20 asset to your team a year later. And the ideal way to do a productive struggle is last place in year one and first place in year two. And I've been able to pull that off a few times.
Yeah, I have similar strategy. I guess you punt the first year. I don't care how my team does. I don't. Do you just focus on youth all the way through the startup draft, or do you ever flip to taking veterans?
It's almost exclusively youth, but I would say I'm drafting players that I think can gain value. So if that's if that happens to be a 28-year-old tight end, maybe last year you get Logan Thomas. You look at him and think he could gain value. Even some of these players that we've seen out of the league, whether it's Andrew Luck, Josh Gordon, Rob Gronkowski, you're talking about different levels of success with those types of picks. But if you're late enough in the draft, certainly those are players that can offer you a really strong ROI on that draft pick.
I have an obscene amount of Andrew Luck still rostered on my teams, because I'm like, the chances that the guy that I pick up off waivers does anything remotely is pretty slim. Yeah. The chances that Andrew Luck comes back and is instantly valuable, either through production or through just trade value, it's a given. If he comes back, he may not come back, but as soon as he does, I have a tangible piece that has immediate value that I cannot wait to depending on how the public react. That's really what buys and sells comes down to, right? Is how does the public react to it? Yep. Because if the public is out over their skis being like, Andrew Luck's a quarterback 1 in Dynasty again, then I'm going to trade him. But if they're like, he's 3 years removed from retirement, and I'm like, okay, well, nobody wants him, I'll see what happens.
Well, I mean, we have seen it play out, and obviously we're talking about small percentages at this point. I mean, I'm probably starting to give up on Luck coming back, but I mean, we saw it with Gronk. He came back and he was immediately valuable in dynasty leagues.
When he came back last year, I had moved him I put him quite high. I think I had him as like a top 10 tight end, and people were like, "What are you doing? Like, he's not good. He was bad last year. He played. He's been retired." And I was like, "Well, these guys don't come back to sit on the bench. Like, Gronkowski is going to be a tight end 1 as long as he plays. As soon as he's not capable of doing that, he's going to retire again. There's no way that he comes back to play bench warmer. Like, it's just not in a player like that." Yep. So anyways, I find one of the things I really like to do in Dynasty startup drafts, along the same lines of what you do, and I think you actually pointed this out to me a few years ago, is that because I use your Dynasty ADP as my barometer for my ADP trends analysis. And one thing you pointed out was that depending on the time of year, veterans move up and down in the ADP. In season, they're quite a bit higher than they are in the off season. So if I'm doing a early season startup draft, after we get through the second round picks, like once I can't get a second round pick anymore, and like within the startup draft, I start looking at the veterans and I'm like, well, which guy can I trade in season for a second round pick? Because that's really my goal, is just get as much like premium draft capital as I can, one way or the other.
I think you have to think about it all as an ROI thing. And sometimes that comes in trades, or sometimes that comes via production on your team. But I think that's a smart way to look at it. That, the issue is, especially if you're drafting early, if you're drafting in, let's say before the NFL Combine in late February, it's tough to draft, like DeAndre Hopkins, right? It's tough to draft DeAndre Hopkins and then hold him for 6 or 7 months. we get a little antsy. We want to make moves, and sometimes that goes, it hurts us.
Yeah, the period after startup draft before the season is like unbearable for me because everybody's pretty happy with their team. So you just kind of like sit on your hands and you're like, I just need something to happen so that I can make a trade. Yeah, all right. Well, that's great. Thanks for sharing this strategy with us. This has been inspirational for a lot of the way that I play Dynasty. So we had week 1. There is, and this is an interesting thing about Dynasty, is that really once we get to the season, it's redraft. Like players' values move up and down every single week, and like a lot oftentimes.
Right.
So who are you pressing the panic button on? Who are you completely out on from the rookie class after week 1? Is there anyone that you're just like, whoa, that's not what I signed up for?
There's a couple guys that come to mind. And one of them is kind of the layup of this question. Kadarius Toney. I mean, I was already worried. And what we saw in week 1 certainly didn't help that. So he's kind of his own category. Trey Sermon would obviously fit into this category as well. We already talked about him. I think we have to be worried about Najee Harris. Now, I certainly would not say that I'm all out. Absolutely not. Because I think a lot of what made him the 101 in most rookie drafts, a lot of what made him a first rounder in Dynasty ADP currently is still true, right? He's still going to get that volume. And obviously that's still a talented player, but it's like we knew all these narratives with really both Harris and the 3 wide receivers, right? That we saw them, and Juju's probably the exception, but we saw Johnson and Claypool and Harris just climb in value steadily all off season. And people would talk about the terrible offensive line. People would talk about Ben Roethlisberger is over the hill, right? He's done. People would talk about there's competition for these wide receivers. Do they cancel each other out? So we knew about all these things. It's kind of back to the conversation about Pettis and Ayuk. Like we had all these hints and we just ignored them and kept spending on them, and their value kept increasing. So, I mean, we saw what happened on Sunday, and that doesn't mean what's going to happen for the rest of the season. Of course, that's what makes the season fun and Dynasty fun. And Pittsburgh was playing a strong defense with the Bills. So I don't think every game is going to be like that, but he didn't have the volume. He didn't get there, even though they were winning, at least in the second half for most of that fourth quarter and so on. He still didn't get the huge workload we were hoping for. So yeah, not quite panic button, but at least thinking about it.
Yeah, I couldn't get over the parallels between Najee Harris and Clyde Edwards-Helaire for me. I like both guys are fine. I don't dislike either player, but both guys just got launched into this stratosphere where I was like, wait, hey, they're not perfect prospects. Like they're good, they're fine.
Yeah,
we're not talking about Saquon Barkley here. Like Najee Harris was like borderline top 5 value, and
yeah, that's what I was going to say. In our ADP at DLF, he got up to RB6. So it was, it was McCaffrey and Cook and Kamara and Barkley and I don't know who I'm forgetting, but anyway, he was 5, but he was next in line after those guys. I think a part of that, especially late in the offseason, part of what that push was were the injuries, right? Because if you're late in the first round, early in the second round, you want one of those good young running backs that you think you can plug in for 5 years, which is kind of a fallacy on its own, but that's another story. But you want one of these cornerstone running backs, and now it's not Akers, and now it's not Dobbins, and now it's not ETN was a little bit lower in ADP, but it's not ETN. So it's not quite a last man standing thing, but I think that certainly helped push the value up for Najee Harris. And it was the same thing for Javonte Williams and other players that were in that range.
Yeah, no, that's funny that I never thought about it in the terms of like the other guys got hurt and necessarily somebody has to move up. Interestingly enough, J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers, Travis Etienne, all 22-year-old bulletproof running backs out for the season before we even get to the kickoff. And I'm like, what is going on? I'm like, get DeAndre Swift in bubble wrap. Get Jonathan Taylor in bubble wrap. This is crazy.
Kidding. It's so frustrating, and I don't get upset anymore. I don't know how. I don't know what about me changed that this is the case, but I'm glad it is. I don't get upset anymore when these guys get hurt from a selfish perspective. You know, my first thought is not, oh, I've got him on my favorite Dynasty team, or I've got him on every team I have, or, you know, I eventually think about that, but that's not my first thought. But with those three especially, it's like, gosh, I just really wanted to watch Cam Akers play this year, you know, with Matt Stafford, and it was going to be the year. That's what it felt like. And in similar way, same thing for Dobbins. And, you know, so those are just three fun, exciting players that I wanted to watch this year. And that's, for me, that's the most frustrating part. And then it doesn't help if I've got them on a few Dynasty teams either.
No, that's absolutely true. It degrades the product, right? Like, now we have to watch players that we probably didn't really want to watch play football.
Now we get to watch Carlos Hyde.
Now we get to, oh gosh, now we get to watch Carlos Hyde. Whew. So, which rookie was like announced themselves as the truth in week 1 for you? Was there anyone that just confirmed all your biases? You're throwing caution to the wind and paying the iron price, whatever it may be.
I mean, it's got to be Chase. I never bought into, you know, the different ball and the drops and all of that. I mean, everything that we knew prior to, let's say, a month ago, to me was still true. And I felt like that was confirmed already. You know, he's already the wide receiver 1. We were calling him the wide receiver 1 on Cincinnati, and a Dynasty wide receiver 1 back in April and May and June after the draft, after we knew the landing spot. Yeah. And then I don't know, maybe we had too much time on our hands. We had to poke holes that really shouldn't have been there. So yeah, I mean, certainly all in on Chase. I actually don't know if I have him on any teams. I need to change that.
Like a blessing in disguise. It probably means you're drafting a little bit later than where he was available. That's humble brag. I was drafting too late to get any Chase. Sorry.
I need to make some trades though.
There you go. Yeah, no, I think, like, I found it hilarious that he had that interview like a week before the season where he's, you know, the balls are a little bit bigger and there's no stripes on the ball, so it's hard to see. I'm like, Jamar, like, come on, Jamar. Yeah. Every wide receiver in the history of football has went from college to the NFL. They've dealt with the same thing and they're not dropping the ball. Just say you drop the ball. It's fine. We know drops don't matter. It's okay. But he was making excuses like, whatever makes him feel better. He's going to come back and be great because that's what good players do. So now I have the Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer. What is going on with Urban Meyer? Is he going to make it through the season? Is he leaving for USC? Is he going to get fired? What's going on?
I don't think he makes it through the season. I mean, this guy, anytime trouble has come his way, he's basically run. You know, he's basically given up. I mean, obviously a very successful head coach in college. He won at Bowling Green. He won at Utah. He won at Florida. He won at Ohio State. He won at all those places. 17-year head coaching career. He only had one season where his team lost more than 3 games. And after that season, he quit. And there was a lot of controversy in that because, you know, the stories came out afterwards about how he treated players, about what he covered up. As far as some sexual assault stuff, some positive drug tests, you know, just some pretty ugly stuff. And then, you know, without knowing all of that, just looking at how he's handled this team this year, the Tim Tebow stuff. I mean, I love Tim Tebow. I think he's great, but that was that was a farce. You know, that was ridiculous. And just he's just setting himself up for, you know, to be the butt of these jokes, I guess. And the quarterback thing was terrible. Calling it a quarterback competition was also a joke. And then giving up Minshew for nothing. Basically, nothing has gone right. And I mean, we talked about ETN. That was another strike. I love ETN, but I don't think he's a first-round NFL draft pick, especially with this team who, you know, say what you will about James Robinson. I would say he is serviceable. And for that team that did not have playoff aspirations, or at least they shouldn't, if they're being realistic, they should have just trotted out James Robinson for another year. And if you want to sign Carlos Hyde, that's fine too. But to spend that draft capital on ETN was horrible. So no, I don't think he makes it through the year at all. I'm sure he's starting to have some health issues, you know, as we speak here.
Yeah, he's been a colossal disaster, like right from day one. Like picking ETN was bad, and then being like going into the media and saying, "Oh, I wish we would have got Kadarius Toney," was like, what?
Yeah.
Like, the only pick you could have made worse than Travis Etienne was taking Toney. Like, come on, man. He's just, and then the fact they already had Laviska Shenault, who plays that role pretty well. It was what was the point? You already had that. You already had James Robinson. Like, this isn't a deep team that has no holes that you can afford luxury picks in the first round. Like, it was just crazy.
Yeah, I think we talked about being frustrated with the season-ending injuries. I would say it's the same thing with this team. I'm frustrated that Trevor Lawrence and Laviska Shenault and DJ Chark have to deal with this situation. It almost feels like a season-ending injury on its own.
The whole team has a season-ending injury for fantasy. Just do not start them. Yeah, it's like, how can you walk into a job and get Trevor Lawrence and do this? Like, it's just crazy. Absolutely crazy.
I don't know. I'm not sure about the ownership there. The Khan family, I believe, is still who it is. They seem like they've been pretty loyal over the years. I hope that's not a negative in this situation. But I guess we'll see. I would be shocked if he's the head coach in January or even earlier than that, honestly.
Absolutely. So, as you know, I'm a big fan of looking at splits and trying to determine which splits matter. So there was a split, a very interesting split that happened in the Monday Nighter.
Okay.
Would you be more interested in the first 59 minutes and 30 seconds or the last 30 seconds of the game?
That's a fun one. I guess I would have to say, well, honestly, I think it's kind of dependent on game situation, because we saw in that Monday night game, we saw Bryan Edwards make the late impact. I'm guessing that's what you're referring to.
That might be it. Yeah.
And you can, if you're a Bryan Edwards guy, you can pat yourself on the back or feel good about that or whatever. And I like Bryan Edwards. Okay. So I hope that leads to a bigger role, in week 2 and moving forward, but I also would have liked if we had seen that more consistently throughout the game. As far as your specific question, I think you can kind of look at it different ways. In that game, the last 30 seconds and then into overtime where it was super important. The game was on the line. We also saw in week 1, we saw Daniel Jones score a rushing touchdown with, seconds left on the clock, maybe a couple minutes. I'm not sure. We saw Marvin Jones save his fantasy day with a late touchdown. So do those really matter? No, of course not. They matter to us, right? Hopefully you weren't starting Daniel Jones, but Marvin Jones was in some lineups. So big picture, do those matter? No. And it didn't score any different because it was late in the game, but if you're talking about Edwards, if you're talking about Marvin Jones, like, okay, I wish that was more consistent throughout the game.
Yeah, I think the question was about Edwards. So you did nail it.
Okay.
I think for me, it's like, well, if he was being targeted earlier and it just wasn't working, he just didn't make the catch, whatever, that's fine. At least he was getting targeted. But it was like the game is basically like desperation mode and they finally looked to him. But what's interesting about that too is just like a minute or 2 before that, they finally also looked at Henry Ruggs. They haven't looked at Ruggs all game either. So it was like, I don't know, like maybe they just couldn't throw Darren Waller anymore. Like he had 20 targets almost.
I was going to say it became a joke that, how many targets Waller was getting. I tweeted about that. Darren Waller got 19 targets. The entire Saints team got 21. So obviously Waller's your best player in that offense, but at some point you've got to get some help from your receivers. You've got these 2 guys that you invested day 1, day 2 picks in, and you got almost nothing from them as rookies. Not even really a glimmer of hope for the future. And then you do almost nothing to upgrade that spot either, coming into year 2 for those guys. So I just don't get it there, but I don't get a lot of the things that Gruden does.
I think he's right there with Urban Meyer and just doesn't make sense. Like I remember 2 years ago, I think it was, they took Clelin Ferrell 4th overall. Yeah. And the night before the draft, Mayock is on TV, or I don't know where he's saying it, but we're gonna surprise people with our pick at 4 tomorrow. It's like, what if people are gonna be surprised, trade back, man. Like somebody wants that pick to take a good player.
Well, that's kind of become it's kind of become a it's kind of become a running joke about that they're going to pick a guy 20 picks too early. And I mean, some of those players have worked out. A lot of them have not, because they were second round talents. That's another just stay away. I mean, Darren Waller is the man, but outside of him, I don't really want much of that Vegas offense.
Yeah, that was I guess that was part of the unappeal to me with Bryan Edwards. It was like, well, we should think he's probably not very good because he wasn't very good last year. And then Darren Waller's really good. We know that because he's done it for 2 consecutive years now. And then we're fighting over who's going to be the second best receiver in a Derek Carr offense. Like, where is the appeal here?
Yeah, I mean, bottom line, they weren't good as rookies, and we see, we'll see players pop up, and if you say something along these lines, you'll always get the examples. What about DJ Chark? What about Tyler Boyd? Like, yeah, I mean, it happens, but I don't think, I think if you're selling disappointing rookies at 75 cents on the dollar, 60 cents on the dollar, based on what you paid, you're going to come out ahead. Big picture every time. And maybe those guys pop in year 3 or year 4, or if it's Corey Davis or Devontae Parker, maybe it's year 6 or 7. But you've already spent that, those 2 second rounders that you got for him, or whatever the case might be. So I don't know.
I totally agree. So when you were looking at, win now teams, I always try to acquire cheap veterans. I don't really like buying the prime age superstars. They're too expensive. But there's always that cheap veteran that you can buy that always, the production outweighs the cost. Is kind of how I look at it. Was there a veteran that you were kind of on the fence for coming into the season? You're like, I think I might want to get him, but he also might be, old and bad, that convinced you that he was actually worth the price after week 1?
Yeah, there's quite a few. I wouldn't say that I was necessarily on the fence. I just wasn't aggressive enough, I guess, really with the Buccaneers offense. I mean, you look at that trio of Brady, Gronk, and AB, and I mean, first of all 3 were super cheap. Even in a super flex league, if you're thinking about Brady, so easy to acquire. And I got a couple shares of AB late in the off season. But I wish it was a lot more now. And I think same thing we talked about earlier, like the signs were there that they're going to run it back. They're going to continue to be aggressive. Both these running backs stink. So they're going to rely on the passing game. Brady, I don't know. He somehow seems to be getting better and younger. I don't. I wish I knew how that worked, but whatever it is certainly working. So those are a couple that come to mind. Corey Davis is. I was not on the fence with him either because I was out. I was out on Corey Davis, and I'm already regretting that. I was actually regretting that in the preseason when we saw him getting peppered with targets. Part of that was, I guess, not some doubt in Zach Wilson, but I kind of bought into the belief or the narrative that he wasn't anything special, which was kind of what we heard early on. So the longer the offseason went on, and the preseason especially, I started to buy into Wilson, and that didn't transfer over to Corey Davis. I wish it would have.
It's funny, the Antonio Brown thing. I was really aggressive acquiring him last year when he came back. So like, I get this kind of the same thing with Gronk, right? Like these players don't come back to sit on the bench. Like they're coming back to play. And so I was really aggressive getting him last year. And then when he's a free agent in the early offseason, in my Dynasty rankings, I had it in all caps. The only thing was in all caps. AB is the buy of the offseason. You must buy AB. Go and buy AB. Why are you not buying AB? And then he re-signed with the Buccaneers. And I was like, damn it, like the ceiling is gone. And then about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, I went into the patrons Discord and I was like, I have this feeling that Antonio Brown might just alpha Godwin and Evans and just be the best player in the offense. And there's nothing they can do about it. And he wasn't. Godwin out-targeted him by a fair amount in week one. But I was like, I'd be a little bit cautious with Godwin right now. And I'd be going to buy some more AB because I think he's going to just take over.
Honestly, I mean, obviously I watched that entire game. We all did. But when I looked at the box score and I saw how many targets Godwin had, I was actually shocked because that felt like AB dominated that game. And I think a lot of games are going to feel that way this year. So yeah, man, he's a tough one. Mike Williams is probably another one that I didn't get enough of, contract year, that whole narrative. New offensive coordinator. Ideally, that's going to be a good thing. It's not always, but and obviously Herbert can sling it. Williams was cheap too, and I didn't invest there.
I missed on that one. I was out on Twitter being like, how is Mike Williams garnering any hype at this point in his career? And then he was really good in week one, and now I'm like, this is a bad take on my part.
Well, yeah, I mean, they used him differently, which again, new offensive coordinator. If they give him some more short work, which they did in week one, not asking him to make the crazy play where he lands on his head every time, then that's going to be good all around, keeping him on the field and giving him some production.
Absolutely. So what's the biggest lesson, or how long have you been playing Dynasty for? I never know. I've never known.
I think 02 or 03 was my first year. Yeah, it's been a little while. Almost, yeah.
All right. So how did you get into Dynasty in the first place?
So I actually played Dynasty before I played Redraft.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I'm one of the weird ones. I think my buddy Scott Fish is the same way. I believe I've heard him say that. But basically, a friend at work kept talking about this fantasy football league he was in, and I knew what fantasy football was, but I wasn't even really a football fan. Honestly, I didn't grow up as a football fan. I don't have a favorite team. I still don't. But what he was talking about, making trades and draft picks, and I loved all that stuff. I did grow up playing Madden, like a lot of people our age did. So everything he was talking about was like, that's my language. So eventually it's so funny because probably for a year and a half, I said, if there's ever an opening in this league, this was a college buddies league of a friend of mine. If there's ever an opening, I want to be in this league. I want to do it. And finally there was. And of course, years after that, or months after that, I guess, I realized there's a million leagues. I didn't have to wait for this one league to have an opening, but that's what I did. So this was the biggest scam ever, Drew. You would not believe this. I get in this league. It was a 10-team league moving to 12 teams, adding 2 brand new teams, me and another guy. There was no kind of, dispersal draft or expansion draft, none of that. The other teams didn't have to protect any players. They kept their full rosters, and me and the new guy got to build our teams from the waiver wire. We just picked up 25 guys from the waiver wire. That was our team. We got the last and second to last pick in the rookie draft, not the first and the second, like it probably should have been. And Byron Leftwich was my first Dynasty rookie pick. This was sadly a 1 quarterback league that I was drafting Byron Leftwich in the first round with. But I was instantly the most active manager in that league. Any news that was breaking, I was on top of it. I was hitting the waiver wire. I was sending way too many trade offers every day. I'm sure those guys hated me because of some of those things. But 3 years later, or 2 or 3 years later, I won the league. So I went from that waiver wire team to winning the league, and I won a couple times before I left. And honestly, I think so much of that is just based on how active I was. I don't know more about the X's and O's of football than I really don't know more than anybody. I don't know that piece at all. I can't analyze a play call or anything like that, but I'm active, and when things happen, I'm on top of it. And that's, it's not quite as true these days with too many leagues and other things going on. But I do think it's a big key to success in fantasy football.
So did they at least give you like a free year?
No, of course not. I'm telling you, this was a scam, and I was all in for it. I thought it was great.
Yeah, that is
I
a
had no idea what I was doing.
But I can see why you have adopted the productive struggle. Like this is what you're born in.
Right. Yeah. It's a good point. It was a productive struggle. It took a little longer than I would have liked.
Fair enough. So what, like, you've been playing for 20 years. What's the biggest lesson you've learned in the time you've been playing?
Man, it feels like there's a lot, and at the same time, that feels like a hard question. I would say just that there's so many ways to win in Dynasty. Of course, I love productive struggle. I don't mind losing for a year if that leads to championships. And I get a lot of pushback on that, which I understand. But there's so many strategies, so many ways that can be effective. And, so to see people arguing about them is kind of silly to me. Like, play the way that brings you enjoyment, to the game. This is still a hobby for us, and a side gig for you and I and so many others that, if it makes you happy to draft Trey Lance in the first round, do it. If you want to build your team around all guys that are 23 years old, go for it. And if that means you lose for a year or two, that's okay.
No, that's a great point. Like, just enjoy your team. Right. Like, if you want to reach on the guy because you like the guy, just take him. Who cares? Like, at the end of the day, if you lose, whatever, it's only money. And unless you're playing like really high stakes, which some people do, but for the most part, people
different lessons for that.
Yeah, for the most part, people are just playing to have fun, and at the end of the day, just enjoy the players that you drafted.
Yeah, it is more fun when you win, though.
It is more fun when you win, but it's a lot of fun when you you have that guy that you're like, oh, I need to get that guy, and then you get that guy, and then he's good on top of it all. Like, that's special. That's what I love. Like, reaching on, or not even reaching. I like DeAndre Swift is one of my favorite. Cam Akers, DeAndre Swift last year. It's like, you don't want to see Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jonathan Taylor. You want to trade down and get these guys. And then to see them be so good, I was like, this is awesome. This is why we play. It's so fun.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you do feel a little vindicated with things like that. If you shoot your shot, if you make your case, and then it kind of plays out that way. It's not like a bragging thing or anything like that. It just feels good to get a couple right every once in a while.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that is it. That's the whole show sheet. We got through it all.
Nice.
So everyone, the listeners of the Bulletproof Fantasy Football Podcast, again, this is Ryan McDowell at RyanMC23 on Twitter. Follow him. And then also make sure you're subscribing to DLF Football. They have basically every tool you can imagine. The ADP is second to none. The rankings, the trade finder, the trade analyzer, the trade finder, it's all great. And you guys are doing a great job over there. So, yeah, anything that you need to add, Ryan?
No, just thanks for that. We're working hard over there. We're adding some new things soon, hopefully, that I think you'll like those as well, Drew. And appreciate your support for sure.
Right on. All right, well, that's it.